architects and designers mediate between theory and practice and present possible outcomes and possible directions for our work of today. So it's really commendable that this kind of work happens. But at the same time, the kind of design that we're interested in for the next Triennale is the kind of design that has possible consequences in reality. We want, as we said before, citizens to come to the Triennale and leave with an idea of what they can do for the future. That does not do away with vision, with utopia. It just depends on which vision and which utopia. And today, we will discuss this beautiful subject, magic pragmatism, with some great speakers. First of all, we're going to have Mariana Pestana. Mariana is a curator at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, where she just curated a beautiful exhibition called The Future Starts Now. But at the same time, she also opened, because of scheduling chaoses, I mean, she's a workaholic, but not to this extent, but she also opened at the same time an exhibition at the MAT in Lisbon called Eco-Visionaries. So she really talks about this idea of magic pragmatism dead on. After her, we will have Maholo Uchida. Maholo is the chief curator of the Mirai Kandi Innovation and Technology Museum in Tokyo. And she's able to bring together a spirit that sees soul and life in pretty much everything on Earth, together with the need to design and to control this kind of life. Then we will have a very small video contribution by Forma Fantasma. Andrea and Simone are known to us all. They are wonderful Italian designers based in the Netherlands, and they couldn't be here today because they teach at Eindhoven at the Academy of Design, and it's the final days for the students to present all their work. Then we will have Rania Kozen. Rania is one of the founders and principals of Design Earth, a wonderful architectural practice that is basically the poster practice for magic pragmatism, and she's also a teacher at the architecture school at MIT. Before this all, however, we will also have a small video. Today, throughout the day, we will have 1 minute, 1.5 minute videos that we actually called from all over the world so that people that could not be here today could give us their contribution. And the first video is by Hayesha Hamid, who is at the Goldsmiths University. It seems to be like the place to be these days if you want to be in architecture and involved in the world. She's going to talk about her project, Black Atlantis. Please, let's roll on the first video.
I'm a practitioner and a theorist, so I don't have an expert opinion on this. But my project Black Atlantis looks at this idea by reading the Anthropocene with Afrofuturism and thinking about the clash of imaginaries where one sees no future and the other sees the future as a means with which to reprogram the present. Through Black Atlantis, I think about possible aquatic worlds that are loaded with histories of destruction and of the deaths of those enslaved during the Middle Passage. But I also think of improbable human survival, ecological survival, and adaptation, and it follows the stories of Drexia, a Detroit techno outfit, who imagine a Black Atlantis comprised of slaves who survived being thrown overboard ships. From this perspective, this degradation has a history. It is raced. It is inextricable from histories of slavery, capitalism, and colonialism. In other words, the ball was set in motion a long time ago, and one response is at the level of the imaginary.
Thank you, Paola, and thank you, Triennale, for inviting me. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here today presenting alongside such an amazing group of speakers. This image, it's a beautiful architectural model by Ornaghi Prestinari. It shows an industrial landscape and a sunset that is also an emergency light. What you cannot see in this image is that under the model is a machine. Actually, this architectural model is a machine, a smoke machine, and every now and then these chimneys puff smoke, real smoke. When Paul Crutzen came up with the term Anthropocene in the year 2000, he assigned the start of this new geological era marked by human action to the year of 1784, when James Watt patented the invention of the steam engine. And whether we like this term or not, as it's quite controversial, as a thinking object, it's quite helpful because it allows us to make a very clear link between technological progress and climate change. Inventions of the 18th century, like the steam engine, were produced alongside philosophies of enlightenment that promoted values of rationality and ideas of technological advancement and progress. So what systems of thought might the ecological awareness of the 21st century inspire and evoke? And it was with this question in mind that I co-curated an exhibition called Eco-Visionaries with Pedro Gadanho, and this is what I'm going to talk to you about today. And we sought to address this paradox through the ecological visions of art and architecture. The exhibition is divided into 4 sections: disaster, coexistence, extinction, and adaptation, or 4 stages, if you'd like. And I'm going to present them very briefly. Ecosystems as far as the Amazon rainforest and the Arctic are changing dramatically. We all know this. Mountain glaciers are retreating. Water supply is shortening. We all know this. Growing CO2 emissions, which contribute to raising the average global temperature on Earth, are the product of burning fossil fuels, and we know this. The repercussions will transcend generations. Nature is no longer something that we can watch from a distance. It enters our house through the windows, through our TVs, through data and information, to haunt our dreams of comfort and progress. And this idea is playfully depicted here in this work by Hehe, Prise en Charge. It's a power plug that exhales smoke, thus giving consumers back the pollution created by their energetic intake. In 1901, there was an enormous geyser of oil that exploded in a drilling site in Spindletop in Texas. And a boiling, kind of an oil industry, a booming oil industry, started there. Many of the major oil companies can actually trace their origins to this place. And it's this landscape that forms the background of Jean Girard's Western flag. It's a video installation that shows a virtual simulation of the Texan landscape, and on it a pole bearing a flag of perpetually renewing pressurized black smoke. And this is against a depopulated backdrop because the site is now empty. It's dried. And so this thick black smoke blows in this memorizing, continuous loop as if the source was never exhausted. So it's a vision of the Western unconscious. Effects of climate change are felt in places very far from those in which the cause is produced. We now know this. We know that ecological formations have a global dimension, that complex networks of geopolitical events interlink northern and southern hemispheres. As Edouard Glissant put it, ecology takes up mystical and political forms. In its mystical form, we could say that ecology privileges notions of the earth as a sacred territory that belongs to its native inhabitants who originally settled the land and thus have the right to it, to the territory. In its political form, ecology captures the stories of people deprived of their own land by way of processes like colonization. But against the model of rootedness, whichever rootedness, Glissant emphasizes the need for a rhizomatic ecology grounded on relations of solidarity between all the lands, between the whole earth. And so this coexistence of sites, of cause and effect, of climate change are incredibly important, and they're visible or rendered visible in works like this by Territorial Agency, Museum of Oil. Portuguese sociologist Boaventura Sousa Santos says that the abyssal lines that once were drawn up back in the 16th century to divide geographies of North and South are still at play today. And they are visible in many of the projects that we chose to have in this area of the exhibition, or this stage. I'm going to show you an excerpt of Quiloanja Quiahenda, an Angolan artist's work, Havemos de Voltar, which means we shall return. And it's a video work that is a political metaphor that draws a very poignant difference between Portuguese, Angolan, and Chinese conceptions of nature and development. It's set in the Natural History Museum, and it's narrated by a palanca negra, an extinct species.
A história aqui representada foi sequestrada pela imaginação fraudulenta de um olhar forasteiro. Se existe alguma história aqui para ser contada, será contada pelas correntes dos rios, estará cravada na crosta das árvores, entoada no canto dos pássaros. A nebulosa recordação das manhãs na floresta continua gravada no meu cérebro. Consigo ouvir o canto dos animais que se propaga em uníssono na copa das árvores. A música escrita nas pautas caóticas da floresta mantém viva a minha alma, estremece o meu esqueleto de resina. A vida conquistou o meu corpo.
Forest Law by Ursula Beeman and Paulo Tavares draws from research that the two carried out in the oil and mining frontier of the Ecuadorian Amazon. This is one of the most biodiverse and mineral-rich regions of the world. And it's currently under pressure from big-scale, dramatic expansion of extraction activities. At the heart of forest law is a series of landmark legal cases that bring the forest to court and plead for the rights of nature. And in particular, it features a paradigmatic trial won by the indigenous people of Sarayaku based on their cosmology of the living forest.
Tenemos todo. Entonces somos ricos nosotros, no somos pobres. El gobierno de Correa dice que somos pobres. Yo le voy a demostrar de que no soy pobre. O sea, tengo madera, tengo pollos, tengo tierra, tengo aire puro, agua limpia, tranquilidad, felicidad, paz.
So from here we move to extinction, because it is estimated that at the current rates, 20% of the planet's species will have disappeared by 2030. In the last few decades, the extinction rate of species has grown from 100 to 1,000 times greater than the geological norm. Biologists and scientists, engineers estimate or consider the possibility of a sixth extinction since the appearance of life on Earth. We all remember the last one, which wiped out dinosaurs. It happened 65 million years ago. So this means that in the coming decades, we humans will have to face changes to the state of the planet for which we are not biologically or culturally adapted. This work by Eva Papa Margariti, which is actually a video work, imagines a future where a variety of entities, material, live, organic, digital, artificial, plastic, coexist in a kind of, I don't know if it's happy, but in a new constitution of the world. We've included in the exhibition an incredible theatre installation called Win-Win by Rimini Protocol, because it delivers a dramatic experience that actually can be embodied, where humans are faced with the possibility of their extinction. And this in contrast with jellyfish, a species that has been around for 670 million years, more or less, against all the threats of global warming, such as the rise in water temperature, decrease in oxygen levels. Jellyfish love climate change. I mean, they grow faster, they become bigger. And this project was developed with marine biologists and animal keepers, and it presents jellyfish as the only likely survivor of a mass extinction, and humans as a fragile species on the verge of disappearance. And so here are some humans faced with this reality. And so we end with the adaptation, with a reflection on the fact that we used to think of humanity as something defined in opposition to nature, that reason and soul seem to divide us from the rest of the world. But now we are aware of the extent to which Earth and humans are interdependent completely. Our species then, therefore, will have to adapt to the environment that it transformed. If we have designed our own extinction, can we design our way out of it? Here I'm going to talk about scry, which is this object in the middle of the image, or scry is the name of the practice, rather, a design, construction, and artistic research practice based in Porto. And their work is about redefining current construction methods so to reflect the impact of new ecological needs. Their biogas power plant, which is what you can see here, is an ongoing project that we've rescued from their studio because it's really a research process for them to investigate the possibility to create units that make homes energetically self-sufficient. This machine, as they call it, combines water collection and waste management with energy production, using the byproducts of one human dwelling, to generate enough biogas to power all the needs of a domestic environment. And in the back, you can see some images of their tests using their own bodies as a measure to create this machine. So to end, you know, one thing is certain amongst all of these ambiguities, that the future, in the future that awaits us, we will be a precarious species fighting for our own subsistence, and our only hope is to make friends with the earth that we are all sitting on. And the processes of ecological becoming are dependent on the ways that we, as citizens, as crowds, as a species, decide to make sense of our own humanity and what it means to be here. So is humankind, as Timothy Morton proposes, a form of solidarity with other species? Or is ecology, as Glissant proposed, a form of interrelated lands that do not belong to any one species? So we were interested in thinking about what kinds of futures could this combined model of solidarity and collective ownership point towards, and we were fascinated by the fact that such possibilities are already inscribed in the present constitution of the world. They emerge in the imaginary landscapes of art projects, in fictional ecologies proposed by architectural propositions. So what does it take for this fictional to be enacted? What kind of energy is needed for the possible to be actualized? And perhaps it relies on a kind of political potency that is less sanitized by numbers and data of scientists and engineers, and perhaps more so distilled from ambivalent encounters of ecologies of between art and architecture, between digital and physical, like Eva's work proposed, between biological and synthetic, as Daisy Ginsberg's work proposes, which is part of this exhibition, but because she's here, I haven't talked about, between north and south, and between feet and earth, or at least that's what we were looking for, that's what we were searching for. That's it, thank you.
Hello, buongiorno. I am Maholo Uchida. I'm a curator. Okay. Okay. I'm a curator working in Miraikan, the National Museum of Emerging Science and Innovation at Tokyo, Japan. I'm very happy to be here in Milan to discuss such an exciting topic, broken nature. And I'm going to talk about broken nature, of course, through my experience of working with robots in Miraikan. I think most of you have never been in a museum, so before going to the topic, could I share our museum shortly? Mirai means future museum in Japanese. So all of our activities is about the visions of future. Then we have beautiful digital globe as a symbol exhibit, and robot and bio new materials and computer science in our permanent collection. And we also often organize exhibitions on other genres of science and technologies, as well as art and design and data visualization. And we also have several visionaries as a guest to collaborate with us. The famous one I would like to show that artist Bioka has performed even twice and gave a workshop to the children and have talked to the public. And here is ex-president Barack Obama made a speech for Japanese students. He didn't say, yes, we can, but he was very enthusiastic about saving our planet of the Earth, nature. So when I was first shared with this topic, broken nature, the question came up to my mind, what is broken and why it's broken and why we think it's broken? Broken is a problem or broken is a beauty? Does broken means against perfect or normal? So many things to discuss. And I think the key idea is a border. What border is, broken is the border between nature and something. For example, a border between nature and human. It can be said between nature and artificial, and more to say between human and technology. Today, I want to share unique view of nature in Japan, Shinto animism. Shinto is a Japanese ancient religious, or it might be called traditional lifestyle or philosophy. First, we can find so many borders everywhere between nature and human. This is the border between forest, and this is the border between ocean, and between tree, and between rocks. It can be anywhere and anything. These are all Shinto shrine function as communicate with gods. In Shinto, there are more than 8 million gods, which means a lot. That's to say, all lives and things, everything and everywhere. 8 million gods are nature and human, even including artificial things. All have soul and life. This is, the Shinto philosophy. And I want to show this thing that traditionally, people even make breakfast and dinner for gods, actually for nature, with same menu as we eat. Ise Jingu, the head of Shinto shrine, these meals for nature have been served more than 1,300 years, even today, without any day off. In Japan, nature doesn't mean against human. We are all part of nature, and we are all the same. So robots in Japan, finally, is deeply related with this Shinto animism philosophy. I think you all agree with that Japan is very famous for robot animation, so I think you all know of these titles, no? And then the important point is that robots are living with people, helping or playing or fighting with people, not obeying people or fighting against people or working for people. All Japanese are grown up with animism, and which is clear vision, illustrated in animation, Japanese robot or even other technologies are realized strongly related on this background. Even before animation, going back to 300 years ago, we have this idea. Here is a tea-serving robot in Edo period as a toy. And aibo from Sony actually means partner in Japanese aibo, debuted in 1999. And Ashimo from Honda is resembled with Astro Boy in animation, tries to be a human partner. And the Paro debuted as a healing robot, as a mental partner. And new aibo with AI act as real dog. And how about humanoid? I want to share our experience working with humanoid robot in museum. In 2014, we started to have 2 humanoid robots by Professor Hiroshi Ishiguro. In this picture, these 2 men are human and the ladies are robots. The story is that we hire them at Miraikan. I remember the first week, all the members in Miraikan, including security guy or cleaning staff, accepted them not simply as new exhibit, more for new member, maybe too much to say human, but as at least, let's say, like they are like living animal in a zoo. So many things happen to us with them. She is Otonaroid. She works as a science communicator to talk with audience. And she is really conscious of her fashion. And first year, she changed her clothes and hairstyle so often. And then the second year, she even changed her face. So this is her new face. And her changing continues. She wears yukata for summer, and she wears new uniform, and this is her with private clothes. And every time we have to have a special hairdresser and a stylist. Once she was loved by a famous UK musician, Damon Albarn, and he wanted to sing in front of her, and we organized many secret concerts. So here we can spot her. So now she is taking after a new robot next to her. This is new robot, Alter, gave us other interesting experience. Alter doesn't look like human at all, but the face resembles to human, but no hair and no eyebrow. He moves and reacts according to his environment by standalone artificial life program. And he is very active on his experiment for research, if people can feel life in robot. Last year, he debuted as an opera singer by Keiichiro Shibuya, and the next month, he is going to perform as a conductor of orchestra with 30 real humans. This will be a very strange situation that robot is in charge of the stage, conducting 30 humans on artistic performance. Also, more than 800 people buy the tickets for this performance, and 20 of the first row will be very expensive that you can have eye contact with him. Do you think people will moved by this performance directed by robot? And if it's yes, why? And what is going to be a difference between human and the performer? So, for the conclusion, so border between human and technology is breaking, not only with robots, but more of the other technologies in engineering, information, or also in biochemical, medical technologies for our body itself. And well, this is my last slide. So I think that technology is no longer for human, it will be with or in human, no border in between. Thank you.
All good? Yeah.
First of all, let us just say we are very happy to be part of the section called Magic Pragmatism, because we believe the construction of alternative narratives, it is not really designed for escapism, but rather quite the opposite.
If you think about our daily experience as citizens, it's so radically mediated by object and digital tools. It is often very easy to ignore the constructed nature of the reality we live in. The way we eat, communicate, or even our love life is now mediated by objects. Nevertheless, even when you are a designer, it's easy to forget that if everything is the fruit of a design strategy, well, then also everything can be reset, changed, and totally be reconceived. While in nature the evolutionary process cannot be reversed, everything that is the fruit of human labor or intellect can at least theoretically undergo radical modifications. If we consider this as a starting point, then the use of imagination becomes a tool to challenge the status quo and to reintroduce freedom in thinking alternative possibilities and to erase what are perceived as unescapable thinking models.
Some of the works we develop over the years are the result of a constant dialogue between imagination and a more pragmatic and analytical approach. Here, we are introducing just a few examples as Botanica that we developed in 2009. Botanica is investigating a very specific moment of the histories of plastics that we call pre-Bakelite, basically before synthetic polymers were introduced in production processes. Back then, researchers were looking for alternatives for rare materials such as ebony or precious stones, investigating plants and animal secretions. What people did not know then is that these materials are actually the first plastics ever invented. With Botanica, we outlined a scenario where we wondered what would have happened to these materials if oil wasn't discovered and introduced in production. If contemporary plastic objects are efficiently molded and flawless, the objects of Botanica are purposely handmade, organic in forms and almost rough in finishing. The actual research for the development of these pieces was extensive and involved both professional material scientists, material historians, and collectors of plastic artifacts. Here, for instance, are some images of the materials tested at the Wageningen University in the Netherlands. To mention just a few of the materials we used, one is natural shellac, which actually is the excrements of insects that colonize trees in East Asia, and the other is called bois d'Aussy, that is a mix of wood fibers and egg albumen, or animal blood. Blood and egg albumen are rich in proteins that, at high temperatures, act as binders.
In 2011, with the Natura Fossilium, we similarly investigated the underestimated potential of materials, in specific volcanic ashes from Mount Etna. The starting point of the work was a very simple observation that while the volcano is now considered as a gigantic entertainment park for tourists, its very regular explosions are defining it. For us, the volcano is similar to a mine, but with no miners. These are some images of the lab analysis of the materials and some of the objects and samples. We explored the possibility of obtaining a volcanic glass remelting the ashes of recent eruptions. To clarify our position, our interest in material investigation is not just a fruit of intuition or an aesthetic attraction. With the starting of the Industrial Revolution, the role of designer emerged as a mediator between materials and their transformation into industrial products. This led to the development of a more detached perspective on production compared to the one of the craftsman, where the sourcing of material, its refinement and transformation into object was part of a unified process. Because of this, we can say that design is preoccupied to define what a material will become more than questioning where it comes from.
The problematic relationship between design, production, and natural resource exploitation is what we are exploring with Ore Streams. This is a body of work we developed for the National Gallery of Victoria in Melbourne, and we are now continuing it for Broken Nature. More specifically, we are looking into the recycling of electronics, which is the fastest stream of waste in terms of growth, and how this is connected to the recuperation of precious, non-precious metals, and rare earths. The research is closely observing the systems of electronics recycling, both in developing and developed countries, involving various practitioners from European recyclers, NGOs, institutions such as the United Nations University, and lawmakers. Within Broken Nature, the work will be displayed both as a series of more narrative and imaginific objects, and a series of videos and multimedia materials that analyze what is possible to do on a design level to make electronics more suitable for recycling.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Paola, and the whole team, Milano, New York, for the organization of this kickoff for Broken Nature. It's a treat to be here today, and the day has been fantastic so far, so I can't wait for the afternoon. I'm Rania Ghosn. I'm an associate professor of architecture and urbanism at MIT and partner of Design Earth with Al-Hadi Al-Jazairi. I want to think with you today through some of the issues that our practice has engaged in over the last few years in thinking about the relations of nature and technology, and in particular about the agency of the architectural project in shaping a planetary imagination at a moment when Earth systems are presented in crisis. So Design Earth is an architectural practice whose work investigates aesthetic forms of environmental engagements to visualize urban systems that change the Earth, but also to bring together a methodology in 4 parts. We engage in the spatial history. We construct both a theoretical framework and historical framework about the matter of concern, a series of geographic representation, projective design, and most importantly, a form of material public assemblies that speculate on ways of living with these legacy technologies on a damaged planet. So environmentalists have brought to our attention that there's not really an outside in which the unwanted consequences of our action can disappear from view. So think of landfills, for example, of oil mines. Although we trace them as beyond the limits of the city, as we'd like to imagine them, they're very much part of our urban contract. So the imperative for design is to argue for an ethics of the distribution of matter and to bring such externalities, or what we refer to as externalities, into public consciousness. And this is what Design Earth proposes. It's an approach to design with externalities. It draws on the geographic imagination to make legible the territories of such technological system and foreground them as elements of design. And you're seeing the installation from the Seoul Biennale entitled Trash Peaks, which plays on the symbolic imagination and our potential to have culturally specific references that need to be reworked in order to imagine a different relationship to nature. So this is no longer the kind of pristine mountains that on the hilltops that surround Seoul, but actually a series of waste proposals that rework the waste systems in the city. Another project, to give you a sense of what I'm hinting to, is a form of communication that addresses this environmental matter by recognizing them and sharing them again in formats that are widely popular. So architecture as a possible mass medium, again, it appropriates themes and displays strategy from a long history of technologies of displaying nature. Think of natural history museums, terrariums, aquariums, and planetariums. And in this sense, rather than a series of mapping representations of a status quo or a series of infographics that speak to kind of a documentary aspect of a relationship to reality, these artifacts aspire to speak. Literally, they're kind of in the legacy of an architecture parlante. They want to respond to these forms of slow violence in what might be perceived as a form of slow media that channels wonder and marvel to introduce concerns to a broader public. And in this case, you're looking at the Pacific Aquarium from the Oslo Triennale that responds to the changing oceans, and particularly to deep sea mining in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and stages in each of these aquarium kind of an architectural scenario that makes visible and sensible, hopefully, these concerns. And what I'll share in detail today is our Cosmorama project, our current contribution to the US Pavilion, Dimensions of Citizenship at the 2018 Venice Biennale. The project responds to current issues that shape humanity's relationship to the cosmos. And it's presented in 3 vignettes. The first is called Mining the Sky, the second is the Planetary Arc, and the third is the Pacific Symmetry. So these geographic fictions, they render visible some important matters that are unaccounted for in many of the narratives of technological triumphalisms and the frontier narratives, both here on Earth and with respect to the space age. They project some of humanity's present environmental and political hopes and fears and bring forth these same systems, hopefully, as generators of a renewed planetary imagination. So the cosmos, or outer space, or the final frontier, or The Empire Strikes Back, you pick your favorite, is an important geographical site in the imagination of technology, nature, and the various processes to extract matter or dispose of refuse. I preface this by saying that this is one of the series of projects that address the extraplanetary in our work, so the importance of thinking of space beyond the planet Earth to be able to actually think more specifically about planet Earth. And it's only one of these instances that we refer to as the province of all mankind. The UN had established a series of legislations that regulated the way we operate in Antarctica, in the open seas, and in outer space. And most of these treaties are either at the brink of renegotiation or have been trespassed already. And I'll share with you a sense of what that is. The scale of these extraplanetary geographies has the fantastic power to explicate the politics of the cosmos, or as the Belgian philosopher Isabelle Stengers referred to them, a true approach to cosmopolitics. And I'm happy to elaborate on that later. But the coupling of the cosmos and politics is a very significant one to open up both the scales of thinking of the question of nature, but also to open up the political contract to species that are beyond the human. The planetarium, in particular, is a device to represent the planetary system, whether the mechanical modeling of the orrery or a graphic representation that simulates the motions of the heavens and projects them on the interior of a darkened room for public viewing. It also refers to the actual structure that houses such a device. So it's both the device and the room. And some structures are both that, actually, as in the case of the 17th century globe of Gotthard, for example, which is a 3-meter miniature that shows a detailed map of the Earth's surface on the outside and a map of star constellations with astrological and mythological symbols on the inside. So notice the kind of juxtaposition of scales, but also a relation between an actual mapping of the heaven and the mythological mapping of the heavens in the same space. It builds the structures needed to bring the cosmos on stage, along with the political body, here the viewer, that is able to claim its part in shaping the cosmos' changing state. As a discipline, architecture has historically inflected how humans understand and see the cosmos. The Pantheon, for instance, incorporates references to celestial globes, the 28-day cycle of the moon, and the 16 directional divisions of the sky, the sunlight that shines as a disk through the oculus into the interior. And gods were identified with meteorological and astronomical phenomena, the weather, the rain, the drought, the seasons, the eclipse, the meteorite shower. We associated nature with a series of mythological and deities that were at moments of volcano eruptions, blazing fiery skies, earthquakes. We had ways of making sense of nature. So what is the planetarium of the Anthropocene? People have once again begun to worry about the cosmos, to fear, as Bruno Latour points out, that the sky may be falling on our heads. Climate change, he argues, calls for another ecological belief system represented in the figure of Gaia that enters the theater of the world. Gaia embodies the words of science and of pre-modern forms of transcendence. It's the same entity. It derives from technological processes of modeling and incorporates mythological connotations as an assemblage of forces indifferent to human reason. And you're looking here at the diagram of the Blue Marble Circus, a contribution to the Boston Design Biennale of last year, which is a 1:10 miniature of the Pantheon, so again, roughly a 3-meter size room. It renders visible the spherical architecture of the cosmos that is inscribed within this structure. The model is a 3D construction of the écorché drawing, so it takes representation as the basis to produce physical space. It peels off ribs to reveal and stage a plastic blue marble in an age of extensive environmental transformations. So the icon symbol of the environmental movement here is a material expression that reckons with the applications of fossil fuels in the construction industry in particular. So extruded polystyrene foam is the material here of the blue marble. The 10 feet or 3-meter diameter globe is made of 32 white foam polygon panels which are machined on a 5-axis CNC router for a cursed surface on the outside and a polygonal cut on the inside. So kind of a Buckminster Fuller assembly again. And the totality is shrink-wrapped in marine industrial film. So you want the blue, you get the blue. It's just plastic. The globe is also the camera obscura. It projects the surroundings on the interior surface of the globe. So there's a little mirror that is hung on top that actually serves to reflect the projections of the surrounding into the little room that you can peek into. So you peek into the hollow chamber. You need to take a minute or so that your eyes adjust to the levels of brightness that are different from the outside. And you need to accept that the view is very blurry for first. It might still be blurry after you put your head there for a few minutes. But it's then that you recognize that the image of the word could actually be contained in an architectural object, and that is projected here on the interior facets of the globe. So the site, architecture, and the globe come together in this moment. So what are the sky tales of the 21st century, of the space resources and space junk, and of life in zero gravity? Climate change calls for this new ecological belief system, and we're calling upon Gaia to help us think of this geographical imagination of assembling a world beyond the Earth. It definitely resonates with an earlier history in which the iconic Apollo photographs, so yes, this one please, the whole Earth, the Earthrise, and a series of other related photographs that staged the world picture that was global and ecological, a standalone planet just outside of us. However, we do not live on a blue marble, insofar as that famous image of the planet symbolizes an objective, holistic, impersonal Earth made visible by technological achievements and systems of representation. So let's read this in relation to another photograph from roughly the same period, 1966 Life magazine photo essay from NASA's Gemini 10 shuttle flight. The article closes with this photograph of a single trash bag floating in space containing objects that the mission wanted to leave behind before its return mission to Earth. The article alerted readers to the growing clutter of space trash, warning that the 1,200 large objects in orbit could someday cause a serious traffic problem in space and eventually become, I quote, the proper concern of extraterrestrial street cleaners. So I'm definitely often tempted to imagine a retroactive history of the ecological movement should this image, one in which our trash is central rather than beyond the kind of representation of the planet. And maybe that's worth a kind of a retroactive history of the environmental movement. So more recently, the final frontier has gained renewed significance with nascent private space initiatives in off-sourced extractive industries for water, planetum, group metals, and other resource riches. Manifest destiny has gone cosmic. And these commercial actors are increasingly invested in geological survey and exploratory missions. There's a mission at MIT, Psyche 2024, that is proposing to map and visit these astronomical rocks and return samples to Earth. Planetary Resources, one of the most famous companies, aims to send swarms of these low-cost robotic spacecraft to extract resources from near-Earth asteroids, as this artist concept shows. So, if we're worried again that the sky may be falling on our head, how is it that we have done so little about it? The environmental crisis, I argue, can be seen not only as a crisis of the physical, the technological environment, it's also a crisis of the cultural environment, of the modes of representation through which society relates to the complexity of environmental system. So how could we respond to this new space age beyond the collective impulse to gather and display such space bodies? What role could cultural institutions, exhibitions, triennales, museums play in shaping that cultural imaginary? And here you're looking at the Willamette meteorite, which was made up of iron and nickel and acquired by the American Museum of Natural History in New York at the turn of the 20th century, so 100 years ago. So what could be ways of engaging future generations in these extraplanetary bodies? So aside from daunting logistics, the largest earthbound obstacle to space mining is the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, which, mindful of Cold War animosity at that point, had declared that no celestial body is subject to national appropriation by claim of sovereignty, by means of use or occupation, or by any other means. Such universal legal geography has been recently violated by national commercial space legislation, such as the US Space Act of 2015, which actually deploys the term citizenship to allow US citizens to engage in the commercial exploration and exploitation of space resources. So citizenship also can be flipped on its head in a relationship to the environment. It's a privilege that we all negotiate and work through.
Treaty on Principles Governing the Activities of States in the Exploration and Use of Outer Space, including the Moon and Other Celestial Bodies. Article 1. The exploration and use of outer space, including the Moon and other celestial bodies, shall be carried out for the benefit and in the interests of all countries, and shall be the province of all mankind. Article 2. Outer space, including the Moon and other celestial bodies, is not subject to national appropriation by claim of sovereignty, by means of use or occupation, or by any other means.
Okay, so this one should play the US Space Act policy, but you can imagine that it allows actually US space exploitation. So the project Cosmorama charts these territories of outer space in 3 geo-stories that articulate the expansion of US empire and private industry interests into this province of all mankind, and the way that speculative effort impact life in the present on spaceship Earth. I won't go into the details of the 3 projects, but they're basically a series of 3x3 drawing. So the first triptych is Mining the Sky, and it speculates on the landscape of the 2015 US Space Act by actually revealing an architecture of this new space age. It's a conceptual section in which you can see the intertwined conflicts of government, the Wall Street, and the space industry investors. The second one takes one of these asteroids, despins it into a point called the Lagrange point, a point of zero gravity between the Earth and the Moon, where it's actually mined. It's kind of a terraforming operation. So the mining actually produces kind of a new cosmic Rushmore, a new landscape of these new gods of the space age. And the third one maintains through this fortification a point of security. So the military is part of securing the expansion and fortification of the space industry. The second series is called Planetary Arc, and it's a collection of living animals. So it thinks about our relationship to nature, but also as citizenship, to terms that not only could apply to humans, but also extend to other species. So both the series of animals that we voluntarily shipped in our discovery to the space age, or that we continue to deploy in labs, as well as a series of species that are currently threatened by the 6th mass extinction in Earth's history. So kind of to reject that kind of Manhattanism, they all board and march into the Empire State Arc. And now that climate change and uncertain future define this new normal on Earth, these animal species are sent out, each on its cubicle, to the International Space Station, where it's a space station whose funding will be discontinued in 2024 and will be repurposed for scientific experimentation on forms of life. And if Donna Haraway and some of her thinking would come through, then, and if there is kind of a possibility of working beyond that extinction, maybe there's a development of a new relationship between amongst these species, and that this fellow traveler might embark on a journey to resettle the Earth some 10,000 years later. So Pacific Cemetery is the point where they will land back. It's a vortex spiral island where currently decommissioned satellites and other space debris are brought back from orbit and recycled at the Point Nemo in the Pacific Ocean. Over the next decades, with the expansion of digital infrastructure, these thousands of satellites that will be launched into space and eventually decommissioned will start to form a significant terraforming operation in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And you know, with every rock that you can claim as part of your territory, you can claim a significant ocean zone around it. So it builds on the precedent of the Pacific Proving Grounds, in which the United States had secured an agreement with the United Nations to conduct nuclear testing in sites of the Pacific Ocean between 1946 and 1962 in its own territory. So the US designates Point Nemo as the strategic trust territory of the space age, which is kind of chosen because it's the furthest from any kind of continental point, and this is the new landfill of the space age. It's also a planetary terraforming project in which the vestige of these space objects become the refuge for the Pacific island nations, but also of other nations currently struggling for their territory. So how do this all come together? And if these environmental issues are incomprehensible in their scale, their ubiquity, and their duration, maybe techniques of representation can make legible the scalar disconnect between the cosmos and its enormity and the scale of concerns of individual concerns, and then the impact of planetary collective consequences. So I'll spare you the details on how the actual 3D printed heads are, but keep in mind they're kind of a Janus face between 3D models of asteroids readily available on NASA's website. So there's a detailed mapping of all these asteroids, and then the names they're assigned, often names of Greek gods. So the gods haven't really changed that much. And myth might remain a particularly effective means for such storytelling. They counter the stories of industrial capitalism with an even more fantastic narrative machine that can tell truth to realism. They ascribe agency where it's hard to assign causality. So this is how it comes together. There's also a series of postcards. I'm happy to share some with you if you're interested. And the centerpiece is that meteorite on loan from the Harvard Museum of Natural History, to bring back that meteorite and puts it at the center of the stage to kind of start to disturb or delight us in new ways of thinking and feeling about the scales of the cosmos. And this is one of the chapters, the planetarium, of the recently published Geostories that includes kind of a reflection on how do we make sense of the environment at the moment in which the Earth is presented at a state of crisis, particularly through these cabinets of curiosities, these cultural artifacts that were previously used, the planetarium, the aquarium, and the terrarium. So happy to talk more about it later. Thank you.
Stay. We're going to have a conversation, yes. Please stay, yes. And I'm going to call Mariana and Mahalo up on stage for a little more of a conversation. You have a microphone there. So the beauty of magic pragmatism is that since it is magic, it enables us to escape gravity, think of space, and think of humanoids, and really branch out. And since it's pragmatism, it allows us to actually think of what could happen, right? So it's quite amazing. And it's interesting to see how we are replicating what we have done on Earth, the imperialism, the colonialism, the invasiveness of some parts of the human species towards others. We're replicating it in space, and we're replicating it in the internet. So it's about being able to visualize for citizens what could be. So I wanted to ask you about representation. Your drawings are breathtaking, and you know it very well. You know, it's just like they are just beautiful. And much of the work that you showed, Mariana, is borderline art. Now, I know that here in this realm we don't care too much, but as Lorenzo Pezzani highlighted before, sometimes formal elegance, formal intention can be a good, positive mean or weapon. Other times it can kind of backfire because it leads you more into magic and less into pragmatism. So let's talk about that. Mariana, is art more effective at changing citizens' behavior or not?
Right, that's the question.
Yes.
I suppose it is true that the works that I've shown, I think, have an aesthetic power that allow you to somehow get a sense, an embodied sense of some of the issues that they talk about or that they discuss. And this was very important, for me at least, when making an exhibition about this subject in a public museum, because it seems like we are numb. I mean, we know about all of this data and information that I even gave to you in my presentation to a certain extent, but it's almost we've become incapable of feeling it somehow, of having an embodied understanding of it. And so I think it's these transformative works that often come out of an intersection, I actually think, of disciplines in most of the cases that I presented. I think that they have that potential to do something to you. But for example, Ornaghi Prestinari have backgrounds in architecture and design. Ursula Beeman is a video essayist. Paulo Tavares is an architect. Many of the projects are actually intersectional.
So it's the magic and the pragmatism coming together.
I think they come together and they form this type of work that allows you to have an experience.
And by the way, you might want to tell the public what MAT is, I mean, where the origins of MAT are, so it...
Right, so MAT is a museum owned by a private foundation, owned by Portugal's largest energy company, EDP. So it was very interesting, actually, to also plant some provocations.
So fascinating.
Yeah.
I know. And by the way, Rania's work, I don't know if it appeared clear, but is right now at the Biennale of Venice. It's the American Pavilion. And it's part of it, it's one of the main part of it, and it's quite an interesting pavilion. I have to say, the Biennale this year, some of the pavilions were so apropos our theme. It's quite amazing. But going back to this representation, the beauty of the drawing, just like the seductiveness of the drawings, how do you use that?
So I teach at MIT, which is a polytechnic university. So pragmatism is bread and butter every day, and it's hard to argue your case for the significance of this work. But I'm glad that that at least the internal audience is becoming more convinced, and I hope you will be as well. I'm definitely not ready to shy away from the significance of the aesthetic or the power of representation as two projects. One that is a professional project, a design project, and the other that's a public intellectual project. So rather than believing that aesthetics might be the privilege of the few, I'm more willing to extend aesthetics to democratize the popular public medium. So for most of you, or at least for me as a resident in Boston, I know that the aquarium is one of the most visited public facilities in the city. The second is the Museum of Fine Arts. And I know that the Museum of Fine Arts is trying to reach out to audiences that wouldn't typically come to the museum. The aquarium does that naturally, and it does that because of its power of enchantment. You call it magic, you call it a proximity to nature. And the visit is marvelous until you hit the climate change room. And then the lights go dimmer. You often get a screen with some kind of a projection of a melting iceberg with a lonely white bear. And you're handed a brochure on how you can make a contribution. And the rationale is called upon to kind of asking you to wake up and kind of behave and act. And for me, this is one of the most concerning moments, that disconnect between the power to speak to you at a moment where you're the most relaxed, you're most enchanted, kind of a bedtime story, the power of a fable. It hits you in the heart, it tells you truth, but it doesn't use the documentary as a means to tell that. And there are many means through which you can speak to truth. So for me, the dream is to extend the project of the aquarium so that this last room is no longer kind of this addendum that speaks a very different language. And honestly, not many people stop there. I mean, a few, usually the chorus, those who are already converted, might stop and pick up a brochure. Most people would rather just go have lunch after their visit. And for me, there's a lot to be done in these spaces. Now, granted, the audience for this project hasn't yet made the breakthrough, but maybe it will one day, of actually speaking to a broader public in the language of enchantment. Because I think the largest challenge is not to speak to industrial capitalism in its own language, not to speak the language of calculation, of metrics, of economic value, of dollar signs, of continuing the kind of the privilege of a single value, that of the economic over other forms of value. For me, the biggest challenge is to actually reformat our relationship to nature that allows enchantment, magic, to play a much more prominent role. And there are models to explore. These cultural institutions might be only a few, but the traditions that were drawn upon, that offering that happens daily, that proposes nature on a plate to something that you can't immediately relate to, but you practice, is part of that enchantment. Maybe they were called myth, religion, at other points, but I think it's a system of value that refuses the quantification of nature into exchange value. And if magic is what we have, magic is what will be deployed.
And your way of speaking is magic. I was just like, oh yeah, say. No, it was beautifully said, really. Yeah, aesthetic intention is a form of respect towards other human beings. It's not at all a minus, it's a plus, it's a means of communication. So the way you talked about it, the way you spoke about the need to make also kind of, not really clarification rooms as seductive as rooms that instead are about magic is absolutely at the core of this idea of restorative design. So it's quite fantastic. Maholo, it is so smart of the curators of the Barbican to have involved you, who believe that technology happens not for but with human, in the making of an exhibition about artificial intelligence, about AI. AI is a monster to many, and many very vocal, Elon Musk among the first individuals, and to others instead it's an angel, and to others still it's just a reality, you know, just artificial intelligence just is. How did you approach an exhibition on artificial intelligence that is going to go to a wide audience and that is going to encompass design and art?
The first proposal, because I thought, you know, the request to co-curate, you know, the AI exhibition in London for the first time, you know, as a Japanese. So I thought they wanted to have something really kind of new approach, you know, understanding of technology or understanding the relation between technology and human. So then it is not about maybe for the wider audience, it's more of like a whole Western culture, you know, behind. So then the exhibition is about not technology itself, it's more about the human wish to communicate with something else, you know, that's human. So then we start with like Shinto animism and Arabic alchemy and golem, you know, from Jewish, and then also the zero and numbers and code. So that's a kind of ancient myth. So that we start with not with technology itself. It's more like, you know, the humans'
with the
memories
myth.
And with the myth. So that's the kind of starting point. And then, of course, we go back to the history of computer science and some of the development of robotics, and we deal with like aesthetical issues and social issues, and, you know, the body and matter, what's going on by AI. So that's a present. So, but the end, so we focus on the future, not related exactly with AI, but again, you know, refer to myth, you know, because the human itself is not different from maybe 1,000 years ago. You know, of course, our brain changed, but so then we want to go back to the myth and link to the future. So then, do you understand? Yeah.
So what kind of image? Do you take positions on AI, or do you present AI to the public so the public can form an opinion? How are you going to actually present such a loaded and maybe inaccurate technology to the world? Inaccurately understood, I'm sorry, not inaccurate.
Like basically, we would like to present, you know, AI as a positive, you know, the positive possible future, you know, but because the politics or the system hasn't been fit to accept this rapidly changing new, let's say, like new things, not just the technology, because it has like self-organization system, you know, as AI. So it's not like the fear of human is that maybe it will not be controllable by human, you know, the AI. So then that's why we would like to show some of the questions, but stay positive, because, you know, we don't want to have dystopia, you know, for communicating with children and family.
And that's really one of the questions that I had, and I'm sure you've heard the same question 2,500 times. The relationship between dystopia and utopia in speculative design and architecture, and the fact that in most cases than not, especially lately, it's been rather dystopian. And I'm going back instead to the late 1960s and early 1970s, before the lead years and before 1972 and the energy crisis, when instead it tended to be quite utopian. I'm thinking of Superstudio and Monumento Continuo. So what do you think has changed? Not certainly the techniques of representation, but is the world at a different place and are architects interpreting it and channeling it? What do you think? How do you position yourself when you look at 1960s visionary architecture?
I mean, so I think the 60s is one significant historical moment in contemporary architecture, but I think also the story extends into earlier histories and earlier practices of imagining forms of settlements, relationship to resources, salt factories. And it might be that there was a moment in Europe which was post-World War II and before the first energy crisis in which certain visions were predominant. But I think it was this moment in which we valued development as a doctrine that would bring progress both to the first world and to the third world. And then a series of post-colonial struggles unfolded, a series of nationalization, some to the good, some to the worst, unfolded. And I think, you know, architecture is part of a broader historical moment. In terms of I've come to use more science fiction as a term that I'm comfortable with over utopia and dystopia because of the juxtaposition that is healthy between the two and that scientists somehow love. They're very comfortable. The kind of the Earth and Planetary Science professor that worked with us on this project was delighted of the kind of the fictional potential because they work with that. This is how they write grant proposal. They're sending a mission to Psyche in 2024. Someone gave them millions of dollars to do that, and they actually engage in beautiful works of render visualization to communicate their projects. So for them, the language of science fiction is exactly what science does to think of its future. And for me that, you know, maybe we can add an R, science friction, just to allow this not to be kind of an teleological vision of the future. But it's, I think it's also very helpful in destabilizing some of our rigid categories of kind of understanding something as true and scientific and understanding something as fictive and maybe not real. So I think that juxtaposition is a healthy one.
That's good, thank you. I'm going to open up to the audience. Does anybody have pre-pranzo? Any questions? No? Yeah, the science fiction, it's also something, and the ambiguity is something that I found really interesting. And that brings me back to the principle of borders. And actually, I'm not going to ask you about borders. I'm going to ask Mariana, because I think it's very fascinating. We had it as a conversation also yesterday. While we're here talking about broken nature as if broken is bad and we need to re-sew all the threads and put pieces back together, you're talking about the beauty of broken and the importance of borders. So how do you, when you hear it for the first time, when you hear this concept, does it displace you as a Western person, or does it make you comfortable? This idea that instead separation, borders, and breakage can be good. How did you experience that in your exhibition? You never heard this question before, so it's tough. But you know, that's what I want, your first impression, because I was taken aback yesterday when she mentioned it the first time.
That borders are
borders are good.
Positive.
Yeah, and instead, you know, Gabriela's trying to obliterate the borders. I am like really trying to put things back together.
And I talked about glissons.
Yes.
I have absolutely no ownership. So my first reaction is, obviously, I'm puzzled by the question.
Yeah, of course.
Because I think we tend to we tend to conceive of ideas like openness and as positive, I suppose. But I think there's also, and since we are talking about ideas of utopia, for example, I think a certain, the idea of a border, for example, between what is actual and what is possible, I think is an interesting one, because when you were talking about utopia, I was thinking of, my favorite notion of utopia, or a discussion of utopia, is that of Louise Marin, who talks about utopia as a negative of the actual world, of the world we live in. So the prefix "oo" or "no" is actually not a place that doesn't exist, but it's a place that is the negative of what we have. And therefore it works as a mirror, and it allows us to see what could be, so that we can then reflect about where we are. And I think that border that can be journeyed between the actual and the possible is actually a really important one. And I think these works that seem utopian at first and therefore not very productive actually have this immense capacity to make us imagine how to cross somehow this line, and yeah, but it's a line to be broken. I don't know if that makes sense. And then I think in terms of in a political sense, with some of the research I've done and in discussion with some of these the artists and architects that I've been talking to, the border is there, and therefore it's very important to discuss it. I'm thinking of Kiloanji's work, for example, and Angola being a territory that is bordered by a physical line on the map, but actually that is suffering the influence of Chinese development, of Portuguese influence, and therefore the metaphor of this palanca negra that says, I feel the blood in my veins, I want to return, is also this idea that not exactly breaking this border, but actually just expanding them itself.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's...
By the way, no, it's great. By the way, this is an amazing moment in which there are so many exhibitions, conferences, pavilions, biennials that are devoted one way or the other to future, to the environment, to our destiny, more than ever. And we have collected many of them in our Broken Nature platform, because we would really love this Triennale to be a channel for all these other efforts to flow onto another kind of audience, perhaps. So we feel that all these efforts are really valuable and important, and we would like to bring them together in one place so that people can look at them almost as if it were a bibliography. It's amazing and beautiful that so many people, scientists, curators, architects, artists, are all doing this at the same time. So Mariana's exhibitions, both at the V&A and at MAT in Lisbon, are fantastic. The Biennale, the American Pavilion, is great. The AI exhibition would be next year, I think May, right? At the Barbican in May. Broken Nature will be in March. At the same time, there are so many that are going on, too many to mention. So just be engaged and have your critical stance and take what's good and leave what's bad, but really appreciate them. And right now, I'm hungry, so we're going to stop. But first, before we stop, I wanted to thank the crew of the theater. They're doing a wonderful job, Valeria Palermo and all of her collaborators. And we gave you good time for lunch, so you can have conversations if you want to, but do come back, because the next session is going to be about complex systems, and it's excellent. I'm going to tell you to come back at 2:30, so we start at 2:45, because, it's like, we give you, but we will start at 2:45 sharp, really worth your while. Also people that are looking at us live, so thank you very much for holding up with us so far, and come back soon. Okay. Thank you. Yay, hungry. There's lunch for us.